Get your paychecks up to 2 days faster with Early Pay. True story. Welcome to Huntington.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of this The Week That Was. I'm Saeed Khan. Glad to be back myself after spending a fortnight on the other side of the pond in England. We can go ahead and talk about that in some of our topics today, and let's see how they weave in. But we are joined with a terrific group to discuss the here and now, local, state, national, and international. We haven't got any news about life on Mars yet, so I guess we're going to have to wait on that one. But joining us, we have attorney and political correspondent and Vanessa Moss. Welcome, Vanessa.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
We have attorney Steve Fishman. Fish, I haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you back.
It's good to be back. It's always good to see Nancy, sitting there with that smile on her face.
Well, last.
You happiest journalist in America.
And summer has officially begun. We have Deadline Detroit columnist Greg Bowens.
Hello.
We have the smiling Deadline Detroit columnist Nancy Derringer.
Hey.
And of course, we have our editor-in-chief at Deadline Detroit, Allan Lengel.
I used to be disgusted. Now I try to be amused. Right. The great Elvis Costello line. So.
Thank you. By the way, I saw Paul Weller outdoors in the UK. Amazing
Really?
Show. The Mod Father still lives.
Wow.
Okay, well, while I was away, and by the way, here's an interesting tidbit for you. They do not teach the American Revolutionary War in the British curriculum.
Really?
Yeah, it is not there. It is pretty much tantamount to teaching CRT in the South.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. I'm like, well, is that their version of CRT?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's actually their version of LOSS. So they realize, probably not a good idea to talk about that one.
Right.
But they do go into great and graphic detail over all 6 of Henry VIII's wives and the fate that they suffered. So, Anne of Cleves, Battle of Yorktown. Anyways.
Do you know the mnemonic for remembering the fate of all 6 of them? I think it's divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. So.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So
now, if you can put a name to those fates.
No, I can't do that. Sorry, I can't go that far.
Very good. Well, though, but in all seriousness, being in the UK with what happened in Highland Park was rather sobering, and certainly a different way of understanding Independence Day. In Highland Park, Illinois, 7 people were killed, several injured by Robert Bobby Crimo III. Not the only act of violence in the United States, but certainly a mass killing on what is supposed to be a day of freedom and celebration. Allan, I believe you've got a clip.
Woman Marjorie Taylor Greene speaking in a clip from her podcast about that mass murder in Highland Park, a clip that went viral on Twitter this week.
Here's what I have to say. 2 shootings on July 4th, one in a rich white neighborhood and the other at a fireworks display. It almost sounds like it's designed to persuade Republicans to go along with more gun control. After all, remember, we didn't see that happen at all the Pride parades in the month of June, but as soon as we hit MAGA month, as soon as we hit the month that we're all celebrating, loving our country, we have shootings on July 4th.
So why does it always seem...
What a dumb twat. Can I just blow out the explicit language, rating right now and just open by saying, what a dumbass.
Unbelievable. It's shameful.
Yeah.
And to think that people support her and put her in office is just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
You know what the sad part is? She's not only deflecting the real issues and stuff like that, but also the code words. Look, Republicans have rich white neighborhoods. It's a Jewish neighborhood, which is what she really wanted to say. The other thing is, you talk about MAGA. She's like, oh, we celebrate the 4th of July. We Americans, It's just so shameful, the divisiveness that people like that create.
Well, also, I mean, the fact that she was suggesting that June is the month that the Democrats and the liberals celebrate only because of Pride. But I mean, so first of all, why does it look like she's always at a video deposition? And the other is that when, if I recall, wasn't there a thwarted situation for a Pride parade? That there was going to be some violence.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I think somewhere in one of those big rectangular states. But the idea that there is some kind of immunity to Pride Month, I mean, it really is outlandish. Steve, I mean, where are we going with this?
Well, to begin with, I think the sickest thing about Marjorie Taylor Greene is not just her level of ignorance and her level of prejudice, but that so many people actually listen to her. I agree with what Vanessa said. These people vote for somebody like that, knowing full well that she's A, stupid, B, bigoted, and 3, willing to say anything with very little cover, by the way, as you guys just pointed out. I don't know where we're going with it. I think that I was driving downtown today thinking about being on the show, and I'm thinking secession is not a bad idea as far as I'm concerned. I wish there were a way. I'm dead honest. Let all these folk who think the way she thinks, let them have their own country. We give them way more dough than we get from them. If you look at the statistics, let them sit there and celebrate each other and whatever else it is they think is fun. And we'll just stay up here in our cities and live like normal people where we have a mix of folk and we have a mix of music and we have a mix of theater.
The problem is, Steve, though, that there's no bright geographic border anymore. It's not the North and South anymore. It's the cities and the rural areas. I mean, we were talking about this last night at dinner. I was out with a few former colleagues of mine, and I said, one of them just bought a cottage up north. I said, we're going to get to the point where you're going to have to shoot your way into your summer home. You know, it's, I mean, that's what, there's more people probably in northern Michigan who would vote for Marjorie Taylor Greene in a minute than there are in, you know, wherever. So,
you know,
I don't know. Pete Buttigieg just moved there, so you know, to Traverse City.
But again, Traverse City,
according to Deadline Detroit, so
is a small blue community in a very, even the county, Grand Traverse County is pretty conservative, but the city, you know, the cities where people live, where most people live, are blue. And that's why I hate those maps that you know, of, oh, look at all these look at how the vote, you know, boils down geographically, where they show these vast expanses like in the West and the upper Midwest and the South that are red. And then, you know, the little fringe along the east coast of Florida and California and Oregon and Detroit and so forth. It's like, well, hey, when sheep and acreage can vote, then, you know, you might have an argument there, but that's not the way it is.
Sheep are
that's
voting.
true, but I we do have to say that, you know, we know that Marjorie Taylor Greene is an outlier, that she's nutso, and that's why her comments made news. It's like man bites dog as opposed to dog bites man, which happens all the time. And
I disagree.
Crazy.
She's not an outlier.
You know what I think
is the Republican Party. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I think is really sad is she gets this exposure, this television exposure. If she's not sad about the fact that people lost family members. They lost their lives on a day that we're supposed to be celebrating the freedom of this country. That is so GD ridiculous. It is so shameful. It's just awful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's par for the course in terms of people being able to just sort of float over the tragedy of the deaths to make a political point. And it is, it's kind of par for the course, unfortunately. How much of a dent did that shooting put in people's 4th of July celebrations? I mean, you know, fireworks were canceled in that area around there, but the rest of the country just sort of moved on with, you know, hot dogs and apple pie,
you know,
as that happened.
Yes,
or
Steve.
after, in the wake of that happened.
I think I've said this many times on this show. I think that all these situations, it's real easy for people to talk until somebody in their family is a victim. It's the same thing I think I've said 100 times. Liberals are liberals till they get mugged. Conservatives are conservatives till they get charged with a crime. Right. Then they love the Constitution and the defense lawyers. I really honestly believe, and I've said this to you guys before, the biggest problem in this country is a lack of integration. And it doesn't necessarily mean by race. It means by ethnicity. It means by your status. It means by how much dough you have. The more contact you have with other people who aren't like you, you start realizing, wait a minute, this person has 2 arms and 2 legs and a family, et cetera, and so forth. I think what happens with the Lauren Boeberts and the Marjorie Taylor Greenes of the world, they isolate themselves on purpose now, and maybe by the way that where they were born, and they never see anybody. They don't know any Jews or any black people or any Asians. They don't know anybody. So therefore, they're the other. And as long as they're the ones getting murdered, then we're not going to talk about guns. But as soon as their cousin gets murdered or they get murdered, then their family members will be joining us saying we need gun safety.
Allan.
I was going to say, I don't agree that Marjorie Taylor Greene is an outlier. I think with the Republican Party the way it is, with the Trump influence and stuff like that, I think she's kind of mainstream there. We see, it's interesting. People always say, like, Joe Manchin, why doesn't he just become a Republican? Because the answer is the Republicans don't want a moderate. He would be a moderate Republican. He would. There's no room for him in the party.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, there's no room for him in the Democratic Party either.
Yeah, he kind of is. Steve, that what you said is interesting, and I think it's true, but I think it also cuts both ways. And I thought about this because over the weekend I was in my hometown in Ohio for a high school reunion. A suburb.
Your 30th, of course. Your 30th.
Your 10. It's her 10 year. 10 year.
And it was it's a suburb very similar to the Grosse Pointes, I would say. It was largely pre-war. And what always strikes me about it as I drive around, first of all, it's been supercharged with money, which is, a little depressing. But when I was growing up, there were apartments, there were, grandma flats, there were smaller houses, there were bigger houses, because before the Second World War, when we built communities, we understood that not everybody was going to be a banker or a lawyer. Some people needed more modest housing. Old people might want to give up their big house and move into a smaller apartment. We needed places for teachers and police officers to be able to live, people who didn't make a ton of money, and that was fairly common. And now, you look at any subdivision in Oakland County, when you get north of kind of the inner ring, and it's like people have an allergy to living close to anyone who doesn't make as much money as they do. And it's really, you're right. It does. It kind of contributes to this self-segregation, this bubble effect. And it's a crying shame. I think it's awful. And it's even happening in these communities that were originally set up to be more accommodating to a wider range of income levels. You can't buy a house in, even in the Cabbage Patch in Grosse Pointe for under a couple $100,000 right now. And it's I'm sorry to say that, but
I just want to say that
that bubble is going to burst here in a second. But the other thing I think that we really need to be mindful of is to not act like that Marjorie Taylor Greene and all these folks aren't stretching and playing to a crowd. She knows what she just said is nonsense. She doesn't really believe that, but she wants to say it because it gets us talking about the foolishness.
Right. She's building her brand. It's like when Marjorie Taylor Greene gets run out of Congress or, decides she wants to go for the big bucks, everybody's going to know her name, and she's going to find a comfortable sinecure on some shitty, right-wing media source that makes Fox News look like the New York Times, and she'll be set for life. I think she's done running a CrossFit gym. So
I just want to say that Nancy was at her class reunion bragging that she works at Deadline Detroit.
She got voted most successful.
Yeah, right.
Well, part of it seems like it's the architecture. Here's a congresswoman from Georgia, but she's got an amplifier thanks to social media and communications, which reaches to Wyoming and Idaho and and all these other places. And she's a darling, and it creates a kind of political penis envy when people in those districts say, well, why can't we have an MTG? And so the next person who seems as crazy as she is, who's running in a primary, all of a sudden gets all kind of support. And people like Liz Cheney, who I am not necessarily defending as the savior par excellence of America, but she ends up becoming this pariah.
You
That
know,
lady's gonna
what's
be president
interesting is that you mentioned social media, and I was reading how you have these politicians blaming social media, placing some of the blame on social media for this guy that went wacko in Highland Park, Illinois. So, you know, you are either a celebrity in social media like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or these same politicians will use the social media as a weapon to say, listen, it's not really about guns. It's about, you know, these people that's off their rockers. And guess what? They showed all the signs on social media, and we need to crack down on social media because they should have been in communication with the policing agency. That's ridiculous.
Yes, it
And
is.
missing from her screed was the fact that this guy actually attended some Trump rallies. I guess that would be a bit of an inconvenient truth when it comes to the politics. But look, I mean, Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister of Japan, was assassinated today by a handmade gun in a country that had, I think, at the most 10 violent crimes involving guns, 8 of them which were committed by the Yakuza gang or organized crime syndicate. The scale is just completely different when you're looking at G7 countries. The United States isn't even close. Steve,
When you mentioned you were in London, I don't know if I've said this to you guys before. We went there. My wife and I went there to Wimbledon right on the 4th of July, maybe right before the pandemic 3 years ago. When I got off the plane, and then when I started going around, I hadn't been in London in a very long time. The first thing I noticed, and this is 2019, the first thing I noticed was the absence of weapons. When we went to Wimbledon to go to the tennis tournament, there were police there. And you knew that, I'm sure there were undercover police too, but you didn't see what you see in New York. You go to the tennis tournament in New York, they got tanks, they've got howitzers. It looks like you're going to war. And it struck me, just as you're saying about Japan, that it must be unbelievable to live in a society where people actually walk around. Maybe they pull a knife every now and then, or maybe they have fistfights like we did when we were kids, but you don't have the presence of weapons all the time. And I just think that all of this stuff, all these situations are the same. It's a young, white, little, scrawny little kid who nobody could stand. His parents didn't do whatever they didn't do. The next thing you know, he sits in his room, gets this brilliant idea, goes on social media, finds out about stuff. Then he goes out and he shoots however many people he shoots. And everybody starts saying, well, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? What nobody ever wants to do about it. Take away the guns. That's what
That's not going to happen.
You know,
That's
it's interesting. It's interesting in Israel. In Israel, you go to Israel, you stand in line at a bank. There's like 3 soldiers standing there with, you know, rifles. You go to the beach, to a bar on the beach. There's guys with 9mm tucked in their, you know, in their blue jeans. But you don't see the violence that we're seeing here in the U.S.
In fairness, Steve, I mean, you know, I don't know if you had the strawberries and cream at Wimbledon, but you throw a strawberry at a nice white shirt, that's a weapon of mass destruction.
You know, the thing about, somebody said something in my presence recently that I thought was really sharp about this kid in Highland Park. And they were talking about how he's been a weirdo all his life, right? You know, he's always been on the outs, you know, kids make fun of him, pick on him, he blah, blah, blah. And at some point, his parents pulled him out of school for homeschooling. And, you know, you look at this guy's father and uncle, and you know that there's 0 homeschooling going on. And somebody said, that guy didn't fall through the cracks. His family reached up and pulled him down through the cracks. And, you know, because we have this, you know, ingrained, especially from the conservative right, that the family is the sacrosanct unit that no one may penetrate, you know, unless there is active abuse, unless a kid's coming to school with, you know, bruises and a black eye, that, you know, that kind of thing can happen. And, you know, you have kids who are pulled out of school all over Metro Detroit for homeschooling because their parents didn't like, you know, mask mandates or any of this other stuff. So, I mean, it's not just mental health. It's a lot of people. It's not just the mental health of the shooter, I should say.
I found yesterday a James Baldwin quote that says, "The most dangerous creation of any society is a man that has nothing to lose." And that's what I think we're seeing a lot of these. And really, we really, America has a terrorism problem. America is, we're having, I mean, in some other countries, there's organizations, whether it's in South America or the Middle East, there's organizations, and sometimes they can be, authorities can be preemptive, but these are lone wolves, which has always been, to the FBI, the most dangerous group, because they are plotting on their own. They're just doing it on their own. And we're being attacked every week as if, this is terrorism. We're.
Yeah.
Well, I want to pick up on this point that Nancy made about how education is seen as something contemptible by the right, and especially public education. First of all, homeschooling, I think, predated the mask mandate, with especially a lot of right-wing conservatives, religious conservatives, pulling kids out of school because they were worried about, Sally has two mommies, and whatever the situation was, or that America wasn't created to fulfill some manifest destiny that was preordained by Jesus Christ. But look at what Hillsdale College President Peter Arndt recently said regarding public education. Here's some of the nuggets. The teachers are trained in the dumbest parts of the dumbest colleges in the country. They're taught that they're going to go and do something to those kids. Do they ever talk about anything except what they're going to do to those kids? You will see how education destroys generations of people. It's devastating. It's like the plague. Well, he was presenting this in front of the governor of Tennessee, because apparently he's being invited to consult on the creation of a whole plethora of charter schools. Economic incentive? I think so. But the fact that the governor of Tennessee doubled down on the criticisms that on receiving the criticism that he was for being on stage while Arndt was speaking is remarkable about where the split is in this country among many different issues. And that's looking at public education. Our own Betsy DeVos also having something to do with this, the former Secretary of Education under then President Trump. Why the assault on the public education system?
Because the smarter and more educated a kid is, the more likely he is to go astray from a strictly conservative, particularly conservative religious home. I don't want to read too much into this. I think that conservatives tend to talk out of both sides of their mouth when it comes to public schooling. It's always the Detroits, the Harper Woods that are the problem. But, Grosse Pointe and Bloomfield Hills and Birmingham, those are not a problem. So it's I don't know what to say about it. I think it's an unbelievable insult for Larry Arnn, of all people, at Hillsdale, of all places, to say that teachers are dumb. Every teacher, with a tiny handful of exceptions, that I had or my daughter had, was doing heroic work. And particularly when you do get into poorer and less economically advantaged areas, those teachers are doing 10 times heroic work. It's an incredibly hard job. They get no support. They get shat upon by people like Larry Arnn and the governor of Tennessee, whoever that is at the moment. And it's there's a huge teacher shortage now, and it's only going to get worse in this kind of atmosphere.
Well, Vanessa.
Yeah, so something that you said, and I totally agree with at the beginning, I think this is all motivated by money. Listen, Hillsdale is looking to open 50 to 100 charter schools there in Tennessee. Not only did he say that teachers are dumb and dogged out teachers, he went on to say that you don't have to have a degree, you don't have to have a teaching certification in order to teach.
Yeah, anyone can do it.
And he said this. This all has to do with the fact that we want to open up these charter schools, and we're going to have these schools filled with people. They don't have to be licensed or certified teachers. They could be You know, it could be the guy that lives down the street that watches television all day. This is strictly motivated, in my opinion, due to money. And you have the Governor Lee, because he got dogged out because he sat there and said anything. But what he said is he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. What he said is, listen, I support teachers. I support public education. As a matter of fact, we've just put a whole lot of money into the public education system. Well, aren't charter schools supposed to be public schools?
They are public schools. Yeah.
Well, look at the standard of homeschooling. I mean, if it arguably is a parent, no one is really questioning what are the credentials of the parent. The parent could be illiterate, without a full complement of teeth, and that is now the standard to kind of consider the bench line or the benchmark. So
I've known two types of homeschooling.
You know, Saeed, you can't be dogging people out like that, making those sweeping generalizations, illiterate without a full set of teeth. What's wrong with you? That's not cool, man.
I'm saying that there's no standard when it comes to homeschooling.
Okay, well, there's no standard. I mean, I a better joke is, do you want Marjorie Taylor Greene, educating your kids?
Sure, but Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't educating most people in homeschooling situations, and there's
no. I'm saying, as by way of example, you pull your kid out, she pulls her kid out. What kind of education would that kid be getting when she's doing these internet shows talking about some goofy, kooky conspiracy regarding shootings? I guess Steve was just talking about this, how we tend to classify people, and some of those folks that listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene are the ones that point to us and call us the elitists, and we don't care, and this causes further division. And so it's a good point that we need to have greater standards when it comes to homeschooling and when it comes to these charter schools and all that stuff. But it's not a good point when we dog them out and paint a broad brush talking about dumb people with no teeth. It's
a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So
corrected.
So
Steve,
one of our viewers took the words right out of my mouth. I listened to all this conversation, and I heard the same conversation when I was a kid. Basically, at the end of the day, what I really think these people are talking about, it's all about race again. They don't want their kids going to school with black kids. They don't want their kids going to school with Jews. They want them to go with their own group of people, just like it was in 1956, where you could go to Denby High and it wasn't anybody other than a white Christian. And I think a lot of this stuff, we give them a little bit too much credit by thinking they're actually trying to talk about something substantive, and it really oftentimes just boils down to race. That's the way I look at it. Maybe I'm a little biased, haven't been a Mumford boy, but that's kind of the way I look at it.
Vanessa.
It's funny. It's funny that we have that going on, because I was talking to my daughter the other day. She's really big. She's in her 20s, and she's really out there fighting for the right for women to have an abortion, to be able to do it in a hospital and that kind of thing. And she said, "I'm so mad that nothing seems to change." And I said, well, look, the year I was born, it was the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And, things have changed. You just haven't been around long enough. But she was like, you guys have had, talking about all of us, had a great opportunity to protect a woman's right to choose for 50 years. And we didn't do it. And so it's interesting that, that here we are almost in every area talking about education and how, and Steve is right, how like some of these folks, it just comes down to race. Well, this was a generation of people who were raised in an integrated society. You know what I mean? It's like, where did they get the idea from that you should have that?
Well, I thought a 7-2 opinion was good enough. Vanessa.
Yeah, I just want to say, to Steve's point, I think he's absolutely correct. Because if you look at Tennessee, they passed legislation where parents could get like $7,800 or more, and they can send their kid, taking these tax dollars, these state tax dollars, and send their kid to a private school, be it a Catholic school, whatever the case may be. So I think Steve has made a very good point that is exactly what it is.
And if in some states, if they're homeschoolers, they get to keep that $7,200 themselves, and they can do whatever they want with it. And so there's all kinds of homeschoolers out there.
Let me say one other thing along the lines of what I was saying. The second half of it is, by doing what they're doing, and this ties into what I had said earlier, by doing what they're doing, they're depriving their kids of the opportunity to go to school with people who aren't like them. And nowadays, as we all know, there are a lot more people that aren't like them anymore because of mixed race marriage, because of mixed religious marriage. By making those kids do what their parents want them to do, the kids are being deprived of the opportunity to get around other people, which would, I am convinced, change their minds and change their opinions about how it is that the public is and how the nation is and what kind of people are bad and good. They'd realize if they were allowed to do it. To go to a place like Mumford, let's say when I was a kid, you see everybody, we had the bad guys and we had good guys and bad girls and good girls, but it didn't have anything to do with race or religion. That's how it should be. And those people don't realize it. But what they're doing is they are depriving their children of the opportunity to see the world as it really is. And that's the most offensive thing to me.
And isn't that what education is all about?
Exactly.
That's what education is all about. And by the way, Steve, do you have on your Mumford School colors today?
Oh, he talks about Mumford like,
powder blue and maroon is what we're.
Loves that school.
All right. I can't tell with the lighting.
It's all about Cass Tech, baby.
Oh, let's not start calling out the schools, okay?
I just want to say real quick, when we talk about being isolated and stuff, as Steve and everyone's talking about, 1995, when the Oklahoma bombing, we went up to Decker, Michigan, where the farm was, where McVeigh and the Nichols were. And
who went to my high school, by the way, Allan.
Oh, okay, yeah. And this town was so insulated from the world. There were people who lived in Detroit 30 years ago who went out there to be away from blacks and Asians and Jews. And here it was, reporters coming from all around, a lot of foreign reporters coming from New York and stuff, and they converged on this. And suddenly we're at the Decker Tavern. There's blacks and Jews, and we had an Asian photographer, and some redneck, as our Asian photographer went to the bathroom, he said, "Who in the hell let that?" And he made some racist Asian remark. It's those people are so insulated from who else in the world is, and
I would point out, though, that many of us are as insulated from them as they are from us. So that to some extent is, you can't really correct that. But, I am absolutely in agreement with Steve's point that in an average public school, in a community that is not like super rich or super poor, you are going to be exposed to a lot of people who are not like you, and that is a good thing. That's part of education. I mean, that's exactly.
So hopefully, I don't want to go on too long. This will be quick. To me, there's three ways, Nance, to deal with what you just said. That we're not all that isolated. There's three things: athletics, music, and where you go to school and how you're educated. Those are the things that keep you from having. You go play ball. I don't care if it's basketball or bocce ball. Whoever's the best players play. Music. They don't say, Benny Goodman didn't say, I'm not going to play with that guy because he's Christian. If the guy could play the saxophone, he's playing. Right. And education is the other thing. You have to be around other people that aren't like you. That's it.
Yeah.
Well, we've got a case a little bit closer to home when it comes to education and sports, and that was a tennis coach over at West Bloomfield High School. Here we had Paul Markham, who, in fact, sued Deadline Detroit for defamation. Full disclosure, we have 3.5 people here who are in some way, shape, or form involved with Deadline Detroit. Just got that out of the way.
Vanessa and I are the independents.
Right.
and I guess half of me. But I just thought I'd throw that disclaimer in from what I see on commercials, with the warranties. The judge dismissed Mr. Markham's case. I think I'll let Allan go ahead and divulge more about it.
I'll just try to do it real quickly. We reported, actually, Metro Times first report on it. We aggregated some. We interviewed a parent who was there, wrote a story about the guy. It was a board meeting in Birmingham. about mandatory masks. It was last summer, last August, and this guy Paul Markham was adamant about, we should have choices, and this isn't Nazi Germany. And he started doing a Sieg Heil and Heil Hitler, and he was, he left the meeting, and there was a police report. It was filed, and he admits in the report, yes, I did a Heil Hitler and a Sieg Heil, all that, and so then
how dare you report it?
How dare you report it? He lost his job. We reported after he lost his job. He was blaming. He sued us, the Metro Times, Newsweek, Daily Kos, and Newser. And I think 4 or 5 cases have been dismissed. The 5th one, I think it's just a matter of the judge getting him out. It was the most open and shut. I've never. This is the first time we've been sued. And the sad part is there was absolutely no standing. Our attorney wrote their lawyer, who has no clue what media law is. Our attorney Herschel Fink, who's one of the best in the business, he wrote him and said, "Look, here's the case law. You have absolutely no case. It's truthful. It was in a public setting, just on and on and on." And the guy said, "Oh, I respectfully decline." And I don't know if he was trying to do a money grab, thinking people would just do a nuisance settlement or what. But we end up with, and we have insurance, which covers some of it, but we end up with a $10,000 legal bill, which we're doing a little fundraising for. But it's criminal that he could even get away with it. And the judge kind of blew off our attorney had asked for sanctions, and the judge didn't want to really deal with it. So anyways, I mean, it's a victory for freedom of the press, the First Amendment. It's just criminal that the lawyer didn't have a clue enough about the media law that he decided that it was okay to file a suit. So
yeah, but we prevailed. $10,000 for her.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, though, right? That, I mean, there's different levels of impunity here. There's the impunity of the lawyer, who should know better. There's the impunity of the individual, who feels emboldened that they can go ahead and say it and then actually own up to it.
Well, when I worked for the Columbus Dispatch many years ago, they changed their law firm from somebody to somebody at Jones Day, which is, of course, a big national firm and a big footprint. And the first thing they started doing was they stopped settling claims for nuisance, for these people who were just out for a little bit of money. The one case that I remember was, we had some story about runaways, and there's a quote in the story where somebody said runaways frequently go to the Ohio State campus area and the area around there because they blend in, and there's a lot of other young people and they can crash, and et cetera. And so we had an illustration that some artist did of a girl with this like schleppy bag over her shoulder and in front of a storefront that said on the window, "Campus Pizza," right? Well, there was a real Campus Pizza, and they sued us, claiming that we had held them up as a magnet for runaways, and blah blah blah. And it was total bullshit. But they were hoping we might throw them a quick $1,000 or whatever. And the lawyer said, "We fight every single one of these, or you're just going to encourage more of them." So that's
I hate to tell you, if you had Jones Day as your lawyers, you spent a lot more than $1,000. As soon as you met,
I wasn't writing the checks. It was a family-owned business, and they had a lot of money.
All right, Vanessa.
Yeah, I just want to say that you're absolutely correct, Allan, in saying that it was a great day for not only the news media, but for First Amendment. But this guy exercised his First Amendment right to say whatever the hell he wanted to say, and he said it. And guess what? You had to pay for it. You lost your doggone job. Mm-hmm. Hate speech, you can say what you want, but guess what? That doesn't mean that you're not going to suffer the repercussions. The other part of this is that I read the story, and I thought it was interesting that the judge did not give you attorney fees, because in my mind it was a frivolous lawsuit.
Yeah.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, and the sad part is his attorney says, well, we're just trying to get it out there that he's not this racist or anti-Semite, but it's like, that's not on us to do his PR for him. I mean, he's in a public
opinion,
setting.
submit it to the newspaper.
Yeah.
Why file a lawsuit?
Right. It's a public. Yeah. I mean, they could have come to us, but I never had any communication with them prior to that. Usually we get some form of communication prior to somebody And like I said, this is the first time we've been sued. And really, I've been in this business for over 40 years. And I've done some controversial stories where people have been indicted. So it's not like I'm doing just fluffy stuff all the time. And this is the first time I've been, sued.
But getting back to that point that you're making earlier about Marjorie Taylor Greene and that, what was it? She's no longer going to run a CrossFit gym.
She won't be running CrossFit gyms
Yeah,
anymore.
that Congress is being used as a stepping stone. I mean, look, I think somebody commented in who's listening in that her salary is $174,000, an expense account and all benefits are covered. She's obviously going to have a congressional pension. Thank you, Ann, for that.
Yeah.
And the economics of this. I mean, here's a guy who was a tennis coach at West Bloomfield High. I don't think they did that well this year, but that's a whole different story.
No, he wasn't at the high school. It was a private club.
Oh, it was a private. Okay,
it was a private.
But the fact that people use these as opportunities to then invest in their own brand, and unfortunately, there may be outlets and platforms that will gladly hire somebody like him because he's now seen as a hero or a martyr.
I don't know that. That was probably one of the dumbest things he could have done. And, the dumbest things he could have said. I wouldn't see that guy as a martyr. I would see him as just exceptionally unable to read a room.
I'm pretty sure,
he had to do it because
I'm pretty sure none of the six of us see him as a martyr, but
I mean, on the one hand, the guy wanted to be able to clear his name, I sued them, and that's his defense for his inappropriate behavior for people who check him. They can go, well, that's not true. I sued them for that. We'll see.
Maybe the Proud Boys need a tennis coach. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So irresponsible on the part of the attorney. I mean, the law that, as our attorney pointed out, he cited the wrong case law. He cited case law that was 30 years old that had been overturned 30 years ago. And sadly, our attorney wrote him a letter in the very beginning saying, here is the case law. You have no case. If you drop this, I won't ask for sanctions. And 2 hours later, he said, I respectfully decline. So,
how much of this do you think might be because of cases like the 2016 election, Brexit, that people just are going to say, let's roll the dice. What do we have to lose?
That's a good point.
I can tell you this. That's one of the reasons why I believe, I didn't know about this case until you guys talked about it. I think the judge did the right thing in dismissing it, but made a big mistake in not assessing attorney fees, because you've got to make sure that people understand there's some kind of a sanction that's going to happen to you when you file bullshit lawsuits. Okay. And I know for sure, knowing Herschel, I doubt very much they did the work for free over there at Huntington and Miller. You know what I mean? And the only way
he's changed firms.
Well, wherever he is, he's been billing for so long, he still has an instinct. Okay. But you definitely, you need to have judges who punish people, sanction people for filing frivolous lawsuits, because if you don't, then you'll be like this guy. Oh, so what? Nothing happened to me.
Right. And to Steve's point, Steve, I think you will agree with me. The attorney that filed this lawsuit, he better be very, very careful, because it could result in something other than just a sanction.
Sure.
Well, I think this example is evidence of how people don't have as much faith in the justice system as they used to. They tend to think that the system is compromised, and you've got your Trump judges and your Clinton judges and your Obama judges, and here at the state level, people tend to think of Republican judges and Democratic judges. And so they feel like, well, I might get a sympathetic judge who, understands my point of view, I believe, in some ways. And that's why this last case that came down, where you had a unanimous ruling by the state Supreme Court saying that you cannot have one-man judges, you can't have judges act as one-man juries and issue subpoenas, was so shocking, to people.
Actually, can't indict.
They said that they can. A one-person grand jury can issue subpoenas and participate in the investigative process. What they ruled 7-0 was that they could not issue indictments. And that's a really interesting thing.
It was actually 6-0. So,
Well, who would issue the
they couldn't-
indictment if not the judge that, that was the grand jury? I mean,
Whichever prosecutor's office it is that asked for the one-person grand jury in the first place. It would go back to, if it's Wayne County, it would go back to Kim Worthy and say, okay, we've done all the investigating. It's up to you to decide whether to indict or not.
So, Steve,
the prosecutor would.
So Steve, you said that you'd gone to Wimbledon in July of 2019. I think 3 weeks after you were there, and I'm not implicating you in this, Boris Johnson became Prime Minister of Great Britain. Again,
Bojo.
Today is a day of disclaimers. But it had a lot to do, of course, with his position on Brexit, another seemingly improbable course of events when it came to the British Isles. And now, as of yesterday, he is Bojo bye-bye.
Right.
He's Brexited.
Headlines saying Bojo bye-bye? That's great. I love tabloid headlines. They're hilarious.
No, that wasn't. I wasn't borrowing from anyone. That was my own tabloid headline. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
You and Greg.
I like it.
You, Greg, and Allan aren't the only journos on this panel. But it was interesting that his downfall came from his failure to manage a guy by the name of Pincher, who apparently was making sexual advances on other men. So Pincher the Pincher, as the tabloids in London certainly call them. Well, of course, the comparisons were doubtless being made between Boris Johnson and Trump, both loudish and loudish, and also really not doing very well for the reputation and the credibility of their respective countries domestically and overseas. In the case of Johnson, though, you had what one tabloid called in Great Britain practically a mutiny. By yesterday morning, 53 or 54 of his ministers and members of parliament had resigned in protest for his failure to step down. Would that would have happened here in the United States, although certainly a different situation. But what does it mean for a country like Great Britain to go ahead and be rid of Boris Johnson, albeit he'll be a caretaker prime minister to the fall? Will it have any implications or any inspirations here in the United States?
I think personally, I think there was an excellent article. I don't remember if it was in the Atlantic or the Washington Post about exactly the comparison between Johnson and Trump. And while they're both louts, and while they both defied regular manners of acting and manners of speaking, the difference was that maybe it's the British that deserve credit for it. Maybe it's Johnson. Trump is a criminal who refused to turn over power, who was willing, obviously, to go to the Capitol in an attempt to violently overturn things. Johnson, at the end of the day, and his ministers, to their credit, that's the second thing, his ministers, 53 people, stood up. How many people of the Trump crew stood up? So I think that it was a perfect analysis of it, that Johnson may have been a lout and he may have been in a certain way a fool. He certainly had his own version of what was proper to do when he's partying it up when everybody else was quarantined, things of that nature. But the distinction between he and Trump couldn't be more evident than the way in which they left office.
Allan, do you think that London 2012 is the same as Washington 1974, where you had a bunch of people march up to the White House and tell Nixon?
It sounded like there's some similarities there. I think nobody told Trump to leave office when he was president. We did see the Republicans went to Nixon and said, hey, and even the Detroit News became, I think, maybe the first paper in the country, or certainly the most conservative paper, to tell Nixon he needed to step down. And so, like you say, I mean, it's nice to see a transition there where the will of the people works, unlike Trump, where we couldn't get the guy out no matter what. I mean, 2 impeachments and whatever, and the guy remained to the very end.
Saeed,
yeah.
Can I ask you a question, since you're the Brit and I am not? What is checkers?
So
CHEQUERS?
Yet another eerie parallel between Johnson and Nixon. Nixon had a dog named Checkers. In the British context, Checkers is the country retreat for
So the Camp David of the UK.
Pretty much, yes,
Okay.
because
All
10
right,
Downing
good.
Street is essentially just an apartment
Right.
above the offices of the Prime Minister.
Okay.
Checkers is his country retreat. And in fact, the real cynical view as to why Boris did not completely step down now, which he could have done, is because he's planned a very lavish wedding with his current baby mama at Checkers. And he does not want to go ahead and relinquish that. Because quite frankly, Boris doesn't have a private residence for himself right now. He's got
he'd be put on the street. You know, it's just
Well,
like a hobo.
exactly
Right?
it. He'd be
Couch surfing. Okay. I was wondering because I kept seeing Checkers coming up in headlines, and then there was a picture of this woman in a flower crown, like snuggling with him. And I know he's been married multiple times, and he's got at least a couple of kids outside of his marriages, at least one or two. And so his current lady is not married to him yet, but they were going to get married.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
That's what I figured.
And right now, the count is pretty neck and neck between him and Herschel Walker as far as the number of disclosed kids. So,
and can't forget Elon Musk.
Did you see the story where Herschel Walker lied to his staff about the children every step of the way?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't make that stuff up. But yes, Checkers is the prime ministerial retreat.
Okay.
And it's quite a fancy mansion.
Okay.
I know that we like Camp David to be a bit more rustic, but
Right.
Checkers is definitely there. But yes,
Okay.
and of course, no relation to the dog. But I think part of the British system and why so many MPs and ministers were anxious is because, of course, in the parliamentary system, it reflects poorly on every individual race. We don't really necessarily have that. We have our other issues. For example, in Michigan 11, we've got quite the race between Andy Levin and Haley Stevens. Of course, the product of gerrymandering, and it looks like, given the fact that Michigan is down one congressional district seat, we stand to lose in one way, shape, or form a pretty good.
No, it's not the product of gerrymandering. That's the new map, essentially, and we had to lose a seat. And the new maps that were approved were, unfortunately, we have to, it's too bad that this battle is between two competent Democrats, but them's the breaks.
So where do you see that race going then, Nancy?
I haven't been paying too much attention to it because it's not mine. And also I have it's not my district, I should say. And also I have a bias here because Haley Stevens' husband is kind of an acquaintance of mine in the internet sense, which is that I knew him pretty well and went to lunch with him once, and now I haven't spoken to him in years, but his number is still in my phone, so I consider him a
wow. That's what it takes to get a vote.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know who I would vote for in that case, but I'm sorry if Andy Levin loses, I feel like Haley has some momentum now, but if Andy Levin loses, that'll be a loss too. So
biblical, Quranic, and internet knowing people. All
yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Allan and then Steve.
Well, Fishman, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll defer.
I think that she's going to win, and she's going to win fairly easy. The most astonishing thing, I'm sure Lengel was about to say that, is that Andy Levin obviously is Jewish and Haley Stevens is not. And yet the Jewish community is pretty much united in endorsing her. They think she is closer to Israel, better for Israel than Andy Levin, which is kind of an interesting concept if you think about it. But I would leave it to you political people. I've not heard great things about Andy Levin, let's put it that way. And it seems to me, just from hanging around with the Jews that I see, I think she's going to beat him fairly easily.
I mean, I think it's fascinating. I mean, it's really, at the level of AIPAC, which is a very conservative, very, very hardcore Israel, and J Street, which is a little bit more liberal. And, the criticism is Andy Levin says, hey, I'm a Zionist, I'm for Israel, but he's willing to criticize them. I spoke to a Jewish person yesterday in that district who says, oh, I'm for Haley Stevens. very, very hardcore Israeli thing. I mean, national money is being poured into that race from Jewish, or, from AIPAC and the other one. I always say, you know what? A lot of the Jews who are very hardcore Israel, they want everything for Israel. And I always say giving Israel carte blanche is not good for Israel. It's not, because ultimately, look, if the solution was militarily, Israel could have won already, but it can't. And so the only solution is through peace. And so you can have, and this is my opinion, you can't keep building in the West Bank. You also can't negotiate with Hamas when they say we don't recognize the existence of Israel. So there's a lot of complications there, but I think people just see things as black and white. And Haley Stevens, it's ironic. Haley Stevens is not Jewish, and she's got really the hardcore Jewish vote. And Levin, which is part of a Michigan dynasty, is Jewish, and he's struggling there. I don't. It's going to be a close race. I don't know that she's going to win. She's going to kill it, but if she does, I don't think it's going to be by much.
Okay, Vanessa.
Yeah, I agree with Steve and you too, Allan. I think Haley is going to win, not just because of her stance on Israel, but she's in the 11th Congressional district. Some of that district was a district that she already represented. Okay, so she already has her own group of people that are going to support her because she was already representing people in that district. The other thing is, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention. Both of them have gotten a lot of money outside of the state of Michigan, but she just got a lot of money from Emily's List. And that is going to make a huge difference in her campaigning. So I think Haley has this one. And it's unfortunate that you have an incumbent versus an incumbent, but we know it happens. It's happened before. But Levin's stand, I think, is really, really hurt him.
I think money-wise, I think she's got a lot more money.
Oh, absolutely.
In a race that's that close, where people aren't that, there are some people who are passionate about it, but a lot of people aren't. More signs, lawn signs that are seen, the more TV commercials. Right. It gives that person an edge in a close race like that.
I hear you folks, and I like Haley. I like Andy Levin. I think they're both great Congress people. Levin is seen as a little more progressive, but he's not embracing that in a way that allows for him to pull the progressives in. He's not talking about the Black Lives Matter movement in Israel and what's up and all that stuff. And so if you're going to go, you got to go hard. Now, now that Levin dynasty is not really known as a real progressive kind of dynasty. It's more of a moderate kind of dynasty than anything else. And it's too bad that Andy Levin really didn't, run that race in the 11th there, where you got New Macomb County at. And everybody, as Democrats, we're leaning on Carl Marlinga to make it happen, for us and not lose that seat. The other thing I think that is really important about this race with Andy Levin and the Congresswoman is that tomorrow there is a picnic for the 14th district. The 14th district is no longer existing after, come January, and it's been divided up into 4 districts. And I think that you'll be able to see in a lot of ways how the support is leaning when it comes to people in that race. It's an interesting time. And the one thing I do want to say is that I think that maybe Emily's List might have waited too late to really weigh in the way that they could. People are voting right now. I've already voted.
I was surprised by that. I was surprised by that too.
Yeah.
They endorsed Portia Roberson, who's been on the show in the 13th. And I was really surprised that endorsement came so late because my ballot's been sitting on my desk for a week. And, I just haven't returned it yet because I have to decide whether I want to be a good Democrat or a rat fucking Republican for this one. So we'll see.
Alex are crazy on the Republican side. But I mean, but you know what? This is the voting season. There's no longer, if you wait till August 2nd or election day, it's too late. The election is over. And so Emily's List weighing in a couple of weeks before the election, you know, they gotta get the commercials up. They gotta make them. They gotta create the mailers. They gotta get them out. I mean, it's too late, man.
Greg, do you think that's the reason why? I mean, you see newspaper endorsements coming out so early, and if so, I mean, will they make a difference? I mean, I know that Detroit News endorsed Tudor Dixon for governor.
I read a series once. Journalists and Allan Lengel make a huge deal out of endorsements. And
I do not. I don't know why you're saying that.
Who decided that we needed to write a story about the Detroit News endorsement? Was that your day, or was that?
That was, but I only did it because it was so many qualifiers. Well, there's nobody great in the race. Right. And she doesn't really have much. I thought it was an interesting.
Yeah, it was an interesting.
I didn't see it as.
I stand correct. I apologize, but I will say that I read a study years ago when newspapers were far more of a force in media than they are now. That said that something like 10,000 votes nationwide are influenced by presidential endorsements, for instance, in national elections. So I would say no. I don't think so. But
I would say this.
I mean, you know, think of when it comes to judges. So many times I'll take that endorsement list, you know, and look at it. If it's the news, I go, no, I'm definitely not voting for that person.
Well, yeah, when you get to the ones where people just don't want to do that, I don't know. I just cannot imagine saying, you know who I'm going to vote for? The person that Nolan Finley tells me I should vote for. I mean, it's just like, it's not, or Brian Dickerson on the other side. It's just,
well, look, Nolan Finley's my shepherd. I shall not want. That's all
No, yeah, it's
well,
it's true.
That is a fine segue, Allan, for our last segment of the day.
Aha, let me get it all queued up here.
Schmuck. It's not Schmuck. It's Schmuck. 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 Now say shh. Shh. Now say muck. Muck. Now say sh and muck together real fast. Schmuck.
We are at that very auspicious moment of Schmuck of the Week. Vanessa, I am going to hand it to you.
Okay. Well, mine is, I don't know if it's one or them together. I'm going to say the Kilpatricks. I think it is damn ridiculous that you have the unmitigated gall to ask people to help you buy a house in Florida and ask people to donate $8,000. It's not smart either. It's not smart at all.
I mean, you could be sending something for the baby. I mean, is that all right?
As I said last week on the show, though,
I think they had a separate fundraiser for the
house.
baby. I'm not sure, but I think so.
Yeah,
but
they do.
Leave Kwame alone.
And you know what? Let me say this. Listen, I think he's a charming guy. I think, you know, he has the infectious smile and all of that. But I mean, listen, didn't we see this before? This is like a rerun. Exactly. Really? This guy says that he has changed. I don't think so. No. A con,
by the way,
is a con.
I did get a ruling. It is acceptable to use Kilpatricks as a collective noun. So you're
Thank you.
Okay. Steve.
I'm going with the guy who I've often used as Schmuck of the Week, but I have a little different slant on it today. Lindsey Graham wins for me, and it isn't really anything that he actually did other than be his usual toadying self. He wins it because the Georgia grand jury has decided to subpoena him as a witness. And while he makes a complete asshole out of himself almost anytime he steps to a microphone, he now is going to be in a very interesting situation that only criminal lawyers really recognize. All of his bullshit and all the things that he gets away with when he's talking on television and he goes on his little news stations, if he talks at all, as far as I'm concerned, if he gets a good criminal lawyer, Lindsey Graham better not say one word, because everything he says could incriminate himself.
And it will be held against him.
And he participated, not as much as Trump, But here's a senator from South Carolina calling to the Secretary of State in Georgia, asking about vote counts and votes and things of that nature. I can't imagine anything that would be more incriminating. I can't wait to see how he handles this. My guess, because he's a weenie and he'd be scared to spend 15 minutes in the lockup, my guess is he's going to listen to the criminal lawyer and he's going to take the fifth. But I want to hear how he's going to explain that when he goes on all his favorite news stations. So, Lindsey Graham, yet again, you're the schmuck of the week.
There you go. Greg.
Man, mine is that Ryan Kelly guy. He got arraigned, you know, for trying to overthrow the government. But he didn't even get the serious charge. He got the baby misdemeanors for being someplace he shouldn't be and tampering with stuff and yelling and all that. And, you know, he pleaded not guilty. I mean, come on, man. We all know you were there. You know, plead guilty. Let's move on and stop trying to use this as a platform to get the Republican nomination so you can get squashed by Big Gretch in November. They're all fighting for the opportunity to get smacked down. But I think I think it would show more leadership if he did accept responsibility for the things that he had done and just sort of move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But hey, you know,
he won't.
They're all law and order, like Steve Fishman said. They're all law and order until it's their turn in the barrel. Then it's, you know, then it's all about my rights and the Constitution, the same Constitution they trample on every chance they get.
All right, Nancy.
I am going with Ivanka Trump, who posted a tweet today. She's been pretty quiet lately, which is, I think, well advised, showing that she's got a few more brain cells than the old man. But she posted a tweet today acknowledging the assassination of Shinzo Abe in Japan. And she says, Abe's advice, wisdom, and warmth had a profound impact on me during my government service. And it was something about using the phrase, my government service, that just kind of stuck in my craw. So I'm doing that for today, the schmuck out of the week. Oh, and then of course she had to include a photograph of her looking like super cute and like in this really short skirt in this like designer suit that she was wearing when she was doing her government service. So anyway, that's Ivanka.
I think she was trying to be one of the Harajuku girls.
His advice on how to get, you know, patents so she could sell her stuff in Japan and China is probably right. She's probably trying to protect her profit margins over there, you know, more than anything else.
I wonder if Abe was one of the people in that little hobnob at the G7 with Justin Trudeau and Angela Merkel, who, when she tried to butt herself into the conversation, they just sort of froze her out.
No,
that was beautiful.
That was epic.
That was. All right, Allan, who's your schmuck of the week?
Besides Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's just obnoxious.
Yeah.
The gubernatorial candidate in Illinois, the Republican candidate, who after the Highland Park shooting said, let's just move on, which is just typical. The Republicans will always go, oh my God, this is not the time for politics to talk about guns control. This is, you know, people are grieving. Well, that's always the time to talk about it. And that seems to be the Republican playbook, is to deflect these shootings. They see it as, you know, it's threatening to them, you know, the NRA and all that kind of stuff. So my schmuck is Darren Bailey, the gubernatorial candidate in Illinois.
Okay.
All right. Well, dare I go ahead and, you know, have one of your schmucks? I decided to go well off the menu here. My schmuck of the week is Inderjeet Kaur of Swansea, Wales. 29 years old, who was jailed for sitting for 150 driving tests for other people. People who could not read nor write English. I'm assuming from her name that perhaps she was filling in for people whose native language was Punjabi. She was only caught when staff became suspicious that she was impersonating applicants. But she ran the table. She was taking tests for people in Manchester and in Leeds. And I mean, okay, I get it that England isn't the biggest country in the world, but that's a lot of gas that you have to spend going from place to place, unless you took public transportation, which of course would be really ironic when you're going to give a driving test. Yeah. Inderjeet Kaur, who wants to try to be another form of Harriet Tubman by creating an underground railroad with people driving. You're my schmuck of the week.
All right.
All right, listen, thank you everybody again for being on. Vanessa Moss, Steve Fishman, Greg Bowens, Nancy Derringer, doing a banger Ivanka Trump today, and Allan Lengel with the last word.
Drive home safely.
But not if you've used Inderjeet Kaur as your driving
exactly.
speaker. Thanks, everybody.